I've been really struggling with the approach I want to take in this video because my feelings about this game are so mixed, and it can be difficult to do a video in that way, I think. And I want to cover a bunch of points really about the game design choices to articulate and highlight the mixed feelings I have about the game, because I came to this game with a great expectation and a great positive feeling. And what I saw of the game and some of what you see back here, the wonderful board, the wonderful minis, reinforced that expectation, and indeed, in the course of gameplay, contributed to the positive feeling. But I think that the best way to summarize this game is just to take a look at some of these cards that I've pulled out here. Some beautiful, evocative art, inviting art, something that, at least for me, makes me, I mean, who wouldn't want to get that potion of healing? That's great. And this backpack here, just as we look through, this is just, it's lush, it's inviting. Well, it's duplicate, but I liked it so much, I guess I put it in twice. Really, really positive. And the feeling of gameplay mirroring this invitation into a world and something highly engrossing and involving. Yet, as we scroll through, the game also has this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Things which, to me, are the opposite of engrossing, involving, and a place I'd really want to spend much time, and basically just leave me kind of shaking my head and wondering what about this game is causing me the mixed feelings that I have about it. There is, in the end, for this game, a labor of love, an homage to games of the past, and it really is effective in invoking the feel of games of the past and of dungeon crawls that are, say, old school but with new mechanics. And I guess the new mechanic in this game, or the new-ish mechanic in this game, is these decks of cards that build up the world, and the dice rolling for combat with the custom dice is a good a new adaptation of a good old mechanic that makes it very easy to modify rolls, to have a simple system with luck modification, and all that works well. But then again, for me, this is a character I would love to play, this kind of vampire character. Just looking at her card art, it just falls flat. And but it's not really about the art. It's not really about the art. The art, I think, is just a symbolism of some of the issues that I have with the game, in terms of it doing something well, but at the same time not well. One of the things that people say about this game is, well, it's fiddly. Well, it is attempting to be a full-fledged dungeon crawl where you are involved in a world, you are doing things. The room reveal in the game is probably the thing that is the game structure mechanic that happens the most. And in order for something like that to happen, you need to have some degree of fiddliness. You need to have some degree of incremental things that you can do to look around a room, to activate a trap, to encounter a minion. That, I think, is endemic to the kind of game that people say they want, some immersion, traveling through a world. So I would disagree on my end in terms of, is there a lot to do? Are there a lot of little things to remember? Yes. Is that fiddly in a negative sense of the word? I would say no. I think it is by nature a supporting mechanism for this kind of game, and I had no issue with that. I think the issue that I had with the game is, in light of all the fiddliness and the different kinds of things that you need to do to interact, or to search, or to do a test, the decision space within that is fairly limited. And by that I mean you are assembling your dice, you're doing the roll, you're making a modification perhaps of the roll based on a token that you may have received. But that's kind of it. There isn't a lot of decision space within the options. So there's options of things to do, but each decision space within that option, it is not so great and therefore starts to feel repetitive. So that's, again, some type of contradiction, I think, that's sort of enacted by looking at the card art, which is so uneven. And so that's one point of the mixed feeling that I got about the game. The second part is that on the one hand, you have a concept of different threats and different minions and different villains and different quests, yet the way they unfold feels fairly directed and fairly linear, that you are just essentially traveling from one room to another and revealing, finding, moving on. And that, after a while, starts to feel just too linear for the expectation of having a variety of quests. And along those lines, you have this massive map board, which is beautiful, and I don't even have fully open here, even though I was just completing a whole quest. You don't really need it. It's here, but you're not going to need to explore it, and you could be on this side of it just as well as on any other, because the background, the lovely artistic detail here actually doesn't really have any meaning. What does have meaning is, say, an individual card that comes with a quest, but the location that you're in is just a flat surface. Again, for something that on some level does a three-dimensional world view or attempts to do that in the story of the quest, there's a major part of it that is just literally and figuratively flat. The rulebook has been talked about by pretty much every reviewer that I've seen and comment that I have read, and it would be remiss of me not to mention it too. And I've said this on many videos that I've done, and I guess I just have a confusion as to why game designers and developers don't seem to take rulebook issues seriously. I had a lot of difficulty figuring out how to play this game, and indeed, I think the usual supporting material, usually I go to BGG and am amazed at the people that put out material to help with bad rulebooks, but in this case, frankly, some of the supporting material on BGG is also contradictory, and I think it's the fault of the rulebook itself. The main document is just really hard to understand. I'm not convinced after playing through about 3 of the different quests and the campaign, which I'll talk about in a minute, that I'm doing this correctly. There's still many things that are confused to me. Now, on the matter of the story guide, this, I think, is an area in which this game really serves its players quite well. This is like a lived adventure, a sort of choose your own adventure with minis, with cards, that does fit together, and it gives you, I don't want to talk about it too much, but it gives you the paragraph-based choices throughout, and it also lets you play through the various card decks and villains and things like that, and acquire new things along the way, whether they're people or objects. This is an extremely effective, perhaps the most effective, like choose your own adventure type of story using physical materials that I can think of. I'm not sure what other board game does this as well, or with as much integration of the physical components and the story and the, I don't want to say leveling up, but growth of the characters as is offered here. It's excellent. And, for that alone, it is probably worth the purchase of the game. if you want to experience something like that, because it is highly successful in what it does in that way, and lets you feel the progression of a lived story, of a changing environment, of a little bit more of interactivity that feels real. To get back to the basic game itself, one other issue I think that I have with the game is perhaps not just a negative. It is just it's a mix again. That I think is my final thought on this, is just everything I think about it is just a mix, which is that while there are obstacles along the way, the decisions, as I said, they're fairly obvious decisions to make, and also it doesn't really feel that threatening or challenging. It feels like you're going to succeed at the challenges. It feels more, I guess, comforting than anything else, which is not really the word you would think of when describing a dungeon crawl. But it feels comforting almost. You encounter a villain, you feel confident that you can survive and move on and get the loot. Thus, because the outcome seems almost predetermined and it doesn't really feel like you're going to lose in the game, it does give that sense of comfort, and as such, it provides a sense of a sort of curated experience, that you are being given an invitation to this world where you know what you need to do, you know how you need to do it. It follows the conventions of the genre pretty well for people who are in the hobby, and I imagine only those who are in the hobby would play this game. In that regard, it gives an experience that is fairly unlike an experience of any recent game that I have had, in that it almost feels like you're playing nostalgia, that it's providing you with an opportunity to live out a nostalgic feel to a game, and yet it is new, and it offers the benefits of all of the decades plus of gaming experience and development that has happened since, say, the 90s, what it harkens back to. So in that regard, it's really quite interesting. As an emotional experience, I guess, is the where I'm going. That as an emotional experience, it offers a feeling of something lingers about the game after you play it. A feeling lingers, a positive feeling lingers about the game, and that is something that is extremely hard to put into words, and I think that's part of the reason I struggled with how to present the video, how to talk about the game, because a lot of the positive aspects of it are just a feeling that I have about it, because ultimately my feeling about the game is landing on the positive. And when I look back, to go back to the beginning of the video where I was talking about looking at it through the lens of the art, my feeling about the game is more like this than it is like this, which to me, this piece of art is one that draws me out of the game and would not make me want to interact with it too much. But something like this makes me want to just step into the world and be in the world and be given the enjoyment of the world that gamers can get out of games, and the feeling of living through a story, or a story that's told through game mechanics, through minis in this case, and through the well thought out and developed interactive fiction, basically, I will call it, that Alter Quest produces. I think in the end, for the solo player, and I have not played this cooperatively, but for the solo player, I think it really shines with this interactive fiction part. The immersion is there, and the feeling of narrative development is there, and character development is there, and tasks to do that make sense, and an emerging story that makes sense. I imagine that the game would shine in terms of the individual one-off scenarios, mostly as co-op. Ideally, probably with two people, because I think with more than two people, the downtime would just be excessive. But the interactions between the characters, like playing it solo two-handed, you get that. But there's so many cards laid out and things that it becomes a little cumbersome. It's, if you're an experienced soloist in this genre, it's not too hard. It's just a little cumbersome. I think it probably shines with 2 players, but in light of perhaps the lack of that ability, I think playing 2 characters, though it is possible to truly solo it with one, playing 2 characters going through the individual scenarios is the way to go. And moreover, out of the box, starting with the story guide where everything is fresh, I think that's where the game is most at its richest, and where the benefits of what the game can offer most outweigh its detriments.